Thank you very much for that inspiring talk, Christiane. Some great and imminent points you mentioned there about drug affordability and parts of the emerging economies that are dealing with this. So there is a couple of questions coming in from our leaders of tomorrow. And the first question is, from your point of view, what are the emerging challenges in implementing universal health coverage in emerging economies?
That's a great question. And first of all, I have to say, I'm absolutely delighted to be here. What a fantastic opportunity to engage with the future leaders of the pharma biotech industry. That's absolutely amazing. So great to be here today. And well, the first question, I think it's a very, very comprehensive and holistic one. What does it take to come up with universal health coverage in emerging economies? And I think that we still are in the process of learning a lot. But what is important is I start with governments in general. There needs to be, and I said that also in my talk, this political will. You have to be committed and also put the finances in place. And I think what it takes is really, if you look at the budget, a government has to invest in infrastructure, in education. There are so many things. But what it takes is that the percentage of GDP that should be used to invest in healthcare would need to increase. But it's all about setting a priority. What I think is important is that emerging economies, and it's my personal opinions, are realizing that good quality health leads to healthier people, a healthier population, a healthier workforce. And when you have a healthier workforce, also the societies can prosper better. That should have an impact on GDP. And I think that's very, very important. And it always starts with primary care first, right? Putting the basics really then in place. And I think if governments are open for discussions and say they should be, or payers in general, whoever the payer is, there are so many, and I haven't really spoken about it, innovative pricing agreements that companies, together with governments, with payers, and with any other stakeholder, can be NGOs who are needed, can put in place. For example, prices can be lower the more volume a government buys, or with a payer, with an insurance company, there can be risk-sharing agreements, meaning the companies, the biotech and pharma company, takes part of the cost of the treatment, as well as the insurance company and the patient. I give you an example. In cancer, you have X cycles of therapy. Maybe 2/3 as the insurance company is paying, and the patient the Ministry of Health, the government, and the remaining number of cycles, the biotech company. So we are sharing the risk, or prices according to GDP. And I think if governments, for example, societies, payers are realizing all the options that are possible, I think that could move healthcare really forward in emerging economies. And for us as leaders, I think that is the role, to come up with such innovative agreements. Sorry, a long answer to that question, but it's a super exciting question, and there are many more aspects even.
Thank you so much, Christiane. The next question is, what can be done to implement universal and free, affordable health coverage systems in countries where corruption is a problem? And in those cases, how do you define what constitutes financial hardship?
Okay, yeah, wow. In countries where corruption is a topic, I think one thing is, but will that be the easiest? Maybe yes, maybe no. How can good governance of healthcare be implemented? And what incentives can be given? And what role can other partners play so that actually good governance. For example, I worked in the Philippines, and insurance companies got bankrupt. And one reason was, according to what was in the news, the corruption, and that money was taken out of the system according to the news. So what other ways can be implemented, and what's the government? And I believe if you can bring several partners together who are helping to finance and to safeguard and are helping to set up a governance and compliance structure, for example, specific contracts that protects against corruption, where payments are being made when a certain service has been given to turn things around, that might really help. But I don't think I have all the answers to that solution. What I have done is in the past to really work with specific projects to find a small niche where it works, and then to start with a pilot. But you need to sit at the table with the right partners to safeguard it so that it can fly.
Absolutely. Thanks, Christiane. So the next question is, in countries like the USA, a relevant fraction of society cannot afford healthcare. In these cases, debt is one of the biggest in the country. What are some of the key steps towards free and affordable healthcare in such systems, and is it possible?
And I think here I think partly it is possible. I mean, who knows how the US, for example, will evolve and where it will go, but there are several mechanisms where things are possible. Prices can be regulated. What I'm saying now doesn't mean that this might be the right approach for the United States. I think there are others who know the US much better. There are mechanisms like reference pricing, meaning a country is looking at a number of other countries' prices and takes the lowest three, or the medium, if that is a way to reduce price. Another option certainly also is to allow, and here I think we as leaders, or future leaders of pharma and biotech can play a role. We can come up with very disruptive offers. For example, not all patients in the US can afford insulin to treat their diabetes. That the first patient was treated with insulin is now about 100 years ago. And companies who are focusing on, for example, biosimilars or generics are certainly making a difference. But again, United States, it's about contracting with pharmacy benefit managers, with closed loop systems like Kaiser Permanente in the US, because the US is not just one market segment, has many segments, and to find there's a right way, again, for innovative pricing agreement, for contracting, to look at reference pricing. These are all ways, or insurance, the Affordable Care Act, how can that evolve? But I think it needs all stakeholders at the table, and patient organizations are playing a major role. And for us as companies, I think we should sit at the table, we as leaders or future leaders, when policy is being shaped. And that is important to participate in that. It's not all about a molecule. It's really when the FDA invites, be there, present, have an opinion, going to the White House. This is what we are doing. And I think that is extremely important. And the openness to learn from other countries where universal healthcare is possible. So it needs also this international exchange from, based on my opinion, a bit more. To crack the US for universal healthcare, I think that might be something we all will observe, but I think we should contribute with disruptive ideas and innovation, and should not be shy to voice out our opinions when we sit at the table. And that's, I think, the role of a leader, to get invited to these tables.
Fantastic. And moving to the other side of the world, a question about the Philippines, and I know you touched on this briefly earlier. What are the initial steps that countries like the Philippines would need to take to move towards universal healthcare?
Yeah, so yes, I actually lived and worked in the Philippines. I lived in Manila. I truly enjoyed it. So what are the initial steps that we get universal healthcare? I think I come back to the political will of the government to put healthcare first, and really to realize what good health can do for the GDP and the evolution truly of a country. But one of the initial steps also is to sometimes just start, and we actually did it yesterday and today exactly for the Philippines, to start small with municipalities and together with other partners like NGOs to come up with extremely disruptive offers. I think it's this openness to understand the offerings that companies like us can do. For example, we are offering insulin for less than 10 cents a day, right? Instead of 36. And so that's something. We spoke about corruption. I can't judge the Philippines today. I'm not there anymore, but I think that's important. For countries like the Philippines, I remember lots of educators, nurses, and physicians are leaving the country. How can we make it a great working environment for healthcare professionals, because they need to be available. You need to have the capacity for primary care. One thing, and that's my personal opinion, Philippines is a huge country with more than 7,000 beautiful islands, I have to say. And I lived in a country like Norway, also huge. The population is much, much smaller, but they were able to come up with a more centralized approach for healthcare. There were only a few specific centers that, for example, were treating breast cancer or multiple sclerosis. So how can you centralize care? Then certainly the topic is how can patients reach all these centers? And I very much believe that countries like the Philippines, that was always extremely open to technology. I remember how often we used 15 years ago the text messages are already to interact. How can telemedicine in these countries being used so that via smartphones, healthcare services can actually reach patients? Today, you can remotely do really, really a lot. And I think COVID has also shown us, now we have to do it. And now it's happening. But one other idea is, again, we as companies, I believe, need to think beyond the product. Can there be an Uber for patients? For example, can there be an Airbnb for patients? I think it's up to us as leaders not only to think very traditionally, but to think beyond. I was actually discussing with my colleagues in Biocon Biologics the following: how can we be the Amazon of biotech pharma going beyond the product? And with Amazon, we don't mean e-commerce. What we mean is Amazon, in my opinion, has changed the way how we are doing shopping today. How can we change the way how we are delivering healthcare and to go beyond the product? And that's our role. And I think emerging countries like the Philippines, if they use these opportunities to reach patients in rural areas, for example, to centralize healthcare, I think these are all options to explore. There's certainly also others. And I would love to hear from the audience if you have other ideas, what actually can be done. If anybody has an idea and thinks outside of the box, happy to hear also these thoughts.
Thank you so much, Christiane. Definitely very interesting ideas there. Amazon for healthcare. I'm sure some of our leaders of tomorrow are going to take that up and perhaps spin something out like that. Be very interesting to see. So the next question is, what role do technology-based innovations such as digital healthcare have in leveraging limited resources in underdeserved communities to advance health equity and achieve universal healthcare?
I give you one example, and again, I take the example of diabetes. And why do I always take diabetes? Because when it comes to non-communicable diseases, it's the fastest growing. We have a diabetes pandemic. Now we have 460 million patients with diabetes. In about 25 years from now, 700 million. And the costs are absolutely enormous. And many people cannot afford the insulin even after 100 years. So when it comes to digital solutions, what's possible today is you can combine, for example, a medicine with a digital therapeutic intervention. And I don't mean an app that looks at your behavior. That's not what I mean. For example, when it comes to insulin, you can combine insulin with a digital technology that helps you to ensure that you titrate your insulin in the right way, and it's constantly using the latest information. That's being done via smartphone. Remotely, healthcare professionals have given the whole treatment plan. Behind this are all these algorithms, and I'm not an IT expert. I don't know how to do all this. And there's the artificial intelligence behind it that makes such a use of an insulin much, much better, because you want to avoid comorbidities. That's one thing. The other thing is, if you look at China, there's something called like the Good Doctor app. So that people can get remotely the health services and can have their physician appointment instead of a minute or two, and you have to travel 3 hours or 2 days. They can get 10 or 15 minutes. That's another intervention. But other interventions for emerging markets are, for example, there are small devices where you can actually test for breast cancer for $1. This is not a traditional mammogram, but you can do the screening with this little technology for $1. And if there then needs to be additional screening, additional diagnosis, this information can be sent electronically to another health center. So I think there are various options for technology, and by far we haven't really explored everything that is truly possible. But I believe we are redefining what biotech and pharma stands for by saying, is a product enough, or shouldn't we actually build an ecosystem around the patient? And the patient is more than just giving a drug. And shouldn't we also redefine what a combination therapy is? And here also technology plays such a big role also for the ecosystem. Combination therapy so far is 2 drugs, 3 drugs. I think it can be a drug and a digital therapeutic intervention, for example. And that is really redefining what a company, a biotech company, a pharma company can do and can really stand for. I think we are at a very exciting time where we are really redefining what we can actually deliver to healthcare systems and to patients. And we need to provide healthcare system savings, and not only on drug savings, but how cost overall in healthcare systems can be reduced, because these savings can then be used to cater to many, many more patients. So we need to provide solutions, not only a biosimilar, a generic, or the next originator drug. I believe we need to find ways so that patient or healthcare services are not only provided at high cost venues like a hospital. We should move to healthcare to low cost venues that can be the home. And then technology plays a major role. Tailored services, digital therapeutic interventions. So I'm very passionate about this topic because I think that's part of what future leaders need to think through. And we today as well, actually.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Christiane, for your time today. We have a 30-minute networking session now, and I would really encourage you to engage with our leaders tomorrow on some of these great ideas that you've discussed today. Again, thank you so much for your time and for the great talk. And we'll now close for the networking session.